Hey ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here for Digital Dojos, and today I'm going to be reviewing Apple's iPhone 11 Pro Max. Got that on the first try. Alright, so Apple's iPhone 11 series has came out. It's their latest in their flagship line. In particular, for me, I have been rocking the iPhone 11 Pro Max. Again, I hate the naming scheme, but when I refer to 11 Pro, in this case, I'm specifically referring to the 11 Pro Max in terms of my use case and for this review. That being said, I am no stranger when it comes to the iPhone. I have used the iPhone for many of years, as you can see throughout the series of upgrades. Dating back to the original iPhone, we've certainly come a long way with that of the 11 Pro line and all the new fancy features in it. So that's where I'm coming from as an iPhone user. However, I want to make it clear in terms of like as somebody who's had to upgrade over the years for my job and as a content creator and tech reviewer, I want to approach this review more of just like the features that I was personally looking this year out of an iPhone as somebody who's not heavily in the review game anymore. Um, but additionally, what it means for you, the base consumer out there, whether you're a tech enthusiast or just an everyday, person looking for a new phone to upgrade to. And what it comes down to is simply this: the 11 Pro is a great phone, whether it's a Pro or Pro Max, has a great camera. However, depending on the circumstance, it's not a great upgrade. And what I mean by that specifically is if you're on the 10s line, I say skip it. Potentially, even the iPhone 10 line can still be worth skipping it. Um, if you're upgrading overall, I think the 11 for the most part will suffice for majority of you out there. Where the 11 Pro line will be more of like a top line upgrade if you're willing to spend the extra bucks or you have the means to. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and maybe that's all you need from this review. But if you're more interested in hearing my thoughts in terms of dissecting that in the details, let's jump into the full review here. So, what's actually new in the iPhone 11 Pro line? Well, you're getting a new design. You're getting I say new design roughly because it's a slightly new improved design in the sense that the back of the iPhone 11 Pro is now coated in a new glass-like material that's supposed to be much more durable. On top of that, it has a much more minimal branding, which I am a huge fan of. It's literally just the Apple logo. You don't get all the text that you did on the previous line. And in my case, just kind of as a reference, I'm coming from the 10s Max in terms of an upgrades. I'm coming directly from the previous flagship phone from Apple. What else is new on the design front? Well, you get the three camera system versus the two camera system that you previously had, and it's the biggest change we've seen since obviously coming from the single camera to the dual camera. It's the biggest change we've seen in an iPhone in a while. In terms of design, I don't know if I'm really a fan of the whole look on the back with the triple camera system. It's very out there, and to me, the technology is great, and I understand everything behind it, but it's just non-Apple like kind of like design to me, coming from the previous iPhones. But it is what it is. Tech spec breakdown: you have the 64, 256, and 512 gig model. Why we still have the 64 gig in a quote unquote pro line, I don't know, but we'll get into that. And outside of the cameras, which is going to be an entire section on its own, the main hardware change. What's new in the 11 Pro is the A13 Bionic chip. It is a CPU. It is essentially the brains behind everything. It's backed by the 4 gigs of RAM that the iPhone 11 Pro has. This equates to faster performance. I think it goes without saying nowadays when you get a new phone or flagship phone, whether it's Google, Apple, or what have you, um, you're going to get a faster phone. You're going to get a faster CPU. I don't think you're ever going to hear them say, we have a new CPU and it's slower, essentially. But how does it actually relate into day-to-day use and like the end user for you when you're using your phone? Well, Face ID is faster. It's improved speeds in terms of the detection and literally from you opening your phone and swiping it if you have it optimally placed. You get better, unlock times and stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that the camera and the angles in which the Face ID can capture are still there, and that's one of my biggest gripes coming from like an older phone, like for example, with Touch ID, you could do that at any angle. You can use that as long as you're holding the phone for the most part with your thumb. You can unlock the phone just like that. Whereas Face ID, you do have to be focusing on that of the camera, but it is faster unlock times. In terms of actual performance, like the animations, opening apps, shutting down the phone, unlocking it, things of that nature, I will say in my test out of the box, comparing it to my 10s Max, I didn't notice much of a difference on that front. And to be fair, maybe the optimization and the apps just aren't out there right now where you can truly see the utilization of the A13 Bionic chip. And I think in terms of like the long-term span, we'll obviously see the performance gains from the A13 Bionic chip. Um, but yeah, I didn't see much day-to-day performance improvements. If anything, my 10s Max outperformed my 11 Pro in some of the just, side-by-side comparisons. And again, I know a lot of you enthusiasts out there, the tech specs, the Geekbench scores, all of that. And yes, those are better. The multi scores and all of that, that's definitely better with the A13 Bionic chip. But I'm just looking at it from, again, an everyday user perspective and what you're actually going to experience. I will say the saving grace comes down in the battery life. The optimization for battery life on the phone, on the 11 Pro and Pro Max, is significantly improved. Apple quotes 4 hours for the 11 Pro, 5 hours additional battery for the 11 Pro Max if you're coming from the 10s line. And I see, maybe not those numbers quite exactly, but just in day-to-day use of like 6 to 7 hours of screen time, I still have about 50% battery left at the end of my day. And that's saying a lot. I mean, previously when I was coming home with my 10s Max, being at 20% constantly at the end of the day after using it, and mind you, I use my phone constantly in terms of like AirPods, music, podcasts, internet browsing, social media, all that fun stuff. I have a pretty decent screen on screen time. So the improved battery life with the A32 Bionic chip was definitely the saving grace. Now, outside of that, physically, the phone weighs a little bit more coming from the 10s Max due to the new materials. The display is improved. It's now the Super Retina XDR display, again, with the naming schemes. It's a great display, 2688 by 1242 in terms of pixels, 458 pixels per inch, 2 million to 1 contrast ratio. What that means in real life, all those numbers essentially mean it's a bright, vivid, beautiful display. The Super Retina display looks great, and most importantly, it's much more brighter with this 11 Pro series. You get 800 nits of improved brightness, and it looks great in direct sunlight, all those situations, low light. You get a really, really, vibrant display. Now, the joke that all the tech reviewers like to make is the focal point of this review is that of the cameras and what do you get in terms of the camera system on the 11 Pro line. Well, you get 3 new camera lenses. You get the triple 12 megapixel cameras. That is the ultra wide camera, the wide camera, and the telephoto lens on your new iPhone 11 Pro series. Now, with that, in terms of like actual camera specs, 2.4 aperture, 120 degrees field of view for the ultra wide lens, 1.8 aperture for the wide lens, and then 2.0 aperture for the telephoto lens. The ultra wide is probably the biggest difference you're going to see in the 11 line as a whole. It's the newest addition to that of the iPhone, whereas like the telephoto is kind of the zoomed in look. Your wide is your standard kind of lens, and then the ultra wide for like landscapes, for things where you can't like physically back up too much or to get any more like room to back up. It's nice to have that ultra wide to kind of capture more in your frame. I will say in terms of actual quality across the photos and consistency, ultra wide you do lose a bit of quality and detail in your photos in my tests, and you can see some of the examples here. A little bit more smoothing and stuff of that nature when it comes to the ultra wide lens, but it's nice to have it as an option. Like the ability to switch to it in general is a nice touch. In terms of cameras, you also get an upgrade to the front or FaceTime camera now. And this is actually one of my favorite upgrades to the iPhone 11 line. 4K 60 frames per second on the 11 Pro and Pro Max. That's actually what I'm using right now to shoot this video on the front facing camera. And that just always, made sense. With a selfie camera, you can see yourself, you can vlog, all that fun stuff. As somebody like myself who uses a camera on my phone on a day-to-day basis for my photos of food, landscapes, what have you. My Instagram story, which if you're not following me, shameless plug, instagram.com/kidguru for really great IG story content. It's my day-to-day driver. And these cameras play a big part in that. And with the 11 Pro, it allows me to take it to the next level in terms of the shots and everything I can get. And how do all those specs translate into real life? Well, the photos are just simply great. The quality, the autofocus, the details, everything that you get in terms of the colors and the mapping. The iPhone 11 Pro cameras simply just are great. I mean, I'll leave it at that. It's not just one of the greatest, cameras you'll see on a smartphone, just a great camera in general when it comes down to it. And I think the argument of like, well, if you're gonna spend that much on a camera, then might as well like, get a DSLR or carry around like a mirrorless camera or something like that. I think that point is moot. Like when people make that argument, or they'd rather spend money on a DSLR or what have you, they don't understand the convenience factor that comes into having an iPhone. Obviously, you're getting great cameras, but you're also getting a great phone and a web browser and apps and all these other things in one package, something that fits in your pocket for the most part. And that's the beauty and brilliance behind these new cameras. Yes, there's a lot of other things that are going on behind the scenes. For example, night mode got recently introduced with the 11 Pro, which allows you to take better low light photos. Um, Essentially, with the new lenses, it allows for more light to be let in. It takes multiple pictures over time and it stitches them to produce a more detailed and brighter image depending on the dimly lit or lower light situation that you may be in. So all of these things in conjunction with the new hardware, allow for overall better performance, whatever scenario you may be in when you're taking a photo or video. Slow-fi, even though I told myself I wouldn't mention it in this review, is one of those new features. It's slow motion for your front FaceTime camera, and though it's good for a good laugh, you'll probably use it once and never again. But yeah, overall, the cameras are great. They're great technology. They're great implementation across the board. And if you're on the Pro line, you get access to everything, essentially. But that leads me to kind of the wrap up of this review, the Pro name in itself, the great debate whether or not the Pro name should even be dubbed for these iPhones. And I've struggled with this. There's been a lot of debate over this because when it comes to Apple, their Pro moniker that they've attached to this, it goes back to their history. Apple has been somebody who's, whether it's their MacBooks or their iMacs, have always dubbed the kind of Pro line as what denotes the vastly improved hardware and features in conjunction with that price point. You have the everyday consumer laptops, you have the MacBook Airs, you have the MacBooks, you have the baseline iMacs, which a lot of people would use as a baseline computer. But then the Pro lines, which denote, much improved hardware for really, professional grade work, workstations and the upgrade paths. All of these things that denote a pro machine, quote unquote. Well, how does that translate to that of an iPhone? And it's a little unfair. I mean, Rene Ritchie, a journalist in the Apple ecosystem, somebody who's very known, pointed out that a lot of other phones out there don the pro names without the pro, quote unquote, features, and they don't get as much flack. And that's true. But I think as a reviewer and as just a tech enthusiast in general, we know that Apple obviously is always going to get viewed in a different light. It's a different company. It being one of the bigger companies out there in the tech sphere, the things they do obviously matter and kind of cause ripples down the line. And to me, simply the 11 Pro still doesn't feel like a pro device, even in that against its baseline model, the 11. Can it be used by professionals to make great things? Yes, but I think that can be said for any phone or any camera or any device. Are the cameras professional grade? I would say yes too. The hardware in them, yeah, for sure. But I think those, that being said, those features and those kind of new hardware additions aren't enough to what I would qualify as a pro device or something for a prosumer. You can get the 11 and have a majority of those features and still take really great photos and video, and save a couple $100 while you're doing that. So what it really comes down to, I guess, going forward, it's more of a marketing thing. Or we see this now even in the shift with MacBooks. A lot more people and students or college students, for example, get the MacBook Pros versus the MacBooks and what have you. It just comes down to whether or not you want to have the top of the line, you want to have the latest and greatest, and you have the means to do so, and you want to spend more to get that, then you'll get the Pro line. But when I think Pro, when I think of a Pro device, I think hardware upgrades, I think more options. I think of even simple things like night mode not being and having a manual control. Why Apple offers a 64 gig option if the whole focal point of the device is the camera and the video, which you're going to end up using a ton of the storage anyway. Why that should even be a baseline option. Why don't we have things like USB-C, which the iPad Pro, which one of the big selling features of it was, the new USB-C port and support. The improved refresh rate on the display on the iPad Pro. We got a great display in the iPhone, but it could have been better. You could have seeing these things that unify the line. The MacBooks have USB, the iPad has USB-C. Even when the iPad came out, the Pro feature was that of the kind of support for accessories like the Apple Pencil, which it only supported at launch, isn't supported on things like the iPhone. These are small nitpicks, of course, but again, it's all these things in conjunctions that could have led to what I think would have been a quote unquote pro device. And I think something we'll see in the 2020 iPhone. Especially given in part with something that we don't get to talk as much in these reviews is the software side. You know, everything that runs behind the scenes on the iPhone. In this case, was iOS 13. Most of your old devices are going to get this new iOS update. Your 10s, your 10s, your iPhones. The backwards compatibility for iOS 13 in itself will bring a lot of new features and a lot of this, brand new life to your iPhone. So with that, I think a lot of your current devices will still stand and be relevant, for some time. But again, on top of that, with this launch specifically, with that iOS 13 launch, it's one of the buggiest launches I've ever seen. I mean, Apple in general had to move their 13.1 update timeframe up because of how many bugs were out there on the 11 Pro, and it kind of just killed the overall experience for me out of the box. Having to experience a lot of those issues and wait for that update, crashes, outright bugs with the camera not loading properly, things of that nature. So overall, I mean, how do I concise this? And the main pros and cons, I think it's always the basic way when it comes to review to kind of lay it out. Pros for me with the iPhone 11 Pro Max, battery life. The battery life on this is amazing, in particular the Max. And for me personally, that was enough of a reason to upgrade because I had the opportunity to do so. The cameras you get are better, more improved on all fronts, from the front facing to the rear three cameras for video and photography. It's great overall, and I think those two things in combination, better battery life and better cameras, for the everyday consumer is always a huge thing. I think when you ask most people what they want in a phone, a lot of the times it's gonna be the camera. So it made sense to make this the whole focal point for this release, but I just wish there was more to it. And that leads me to the cons. It's better, but it still feels the same. I know that sounds weird. It's like a weird marketing thing where, like, when you get the new phone, you want it to feel somewhat different. Even when they do the S lines, they always do something to kind of give it that difference, whether it's a software feature or a hardware feature. And yes, you have the new cameras here and the improved hardware, but coming from the 10s Max, it didn't feel that different. The speed, the performance overall, in some cases, were outshined in the 10s Max. The 10s Max did better than the 11 Pro in my tests, at least, or just real world tests, I should say, not on a tech sheet. Um, it felt the same to me, in the form factor, everything of that outside the new cameras. That's one con I will mention. And the other con in that of there's just great competition out there nowadays. It's not a market where Apple purely dominates the field. Google, Huawei, Samsung all offer really great alternatives if you're willing to go to the Android side. And if anything, the greatest competitor to this iPhone 11 Pro is that of the 2020 iPhone. What we'll see in the future, which will certainly probably be a new design, potentially getting rid of the notch and having all these new, and I know again, a new look doesn't sound like much, but trust me, it goes a long way when you can tell something is new and in general the market response to that. So its greatest competition may be itself in this case. Bottom line, if you're on any iPhone older than the 10s line, I think, yeah, you can upgrade if you have the finances and or the upgrade path to do so if you're on an upgrade plan. You get a great phone. It's one of the best flagship cameras out there right now. And if cameras and battery life are your thing, then it's a solid phone at that. However, for most people, I am going to say that the iPhone 11 will 110% suffice for you. You get the new ultra wide lens, you get the A13 Bionic chip, you get improved battery life. Yeah, you get a slightly different material on the back of your phone. And if you, again, want the bigger screen, then you kind of have to go to the Pro line. But for majority of you out there, the iPhone 11 will suffice. Otherwise, I say wait it out. The 2020 iPhone will be much more improved. And, at that, this kind of just feels like an S upgrade to me versus a Pro upgrade to me. And again, if you are comparing it to other phones, well, there's a lot of great options out there. That's a little bit more to unpack. And you have to ask yourself, what are your needs versus Androids and iOS? It's a great phone, even greater camera, if not the best camera on a smartphone currently, but it's not the greatest upgrade. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my 2 cents in my 20-minute review here on the iPhone 11 Pro Max. As always, I love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, and comments down below. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.